Hello, welcome to this episode of a Creative Approach podcast. I'm your host, Karen Poirier-Brody. Today our guest is Alison Brown. Alison is a photographer and a sustainability specialist. Art and the environment are two topics dear to my heart, and I'm looking forward to sharing my conversation with Alison. Life in my corner of the world is as it should be. Summer is definitely on our doorstep. I do prefer warm weather to cold, but I'm glad that I live in a city full of trees. It can get oppressively hot here in Sacramento in the summer. Trees help. My son graduated from community college a couple of weeks ago, and the weather was perfect that day. May is usually the last of our rainy season. The sun had come out by noon and dried things out and left us comfortable for the evening. No matter the weather, I would have attended. It's a terrific feeling to see your child accomplish a goal. While I already have degrees and now attend college for personal enrichment, I do have goals too. Not all are academic and some are quite modest, though they seem at times near impossible. I believe I've mentioned I hired a personal organizer. It appears that organizing the rest of my life will be somewhat more challenging than my previous closet organizing with my stylist. Purging goes more slowly. Part of the challenge is that categories for clothing seem limited, but general possessions, unlike clothing collections, seem not so finite. Craft supplies and paperwork are the most challenging of all to organize. I'd like it to be over tomorrow, but Tara, my organizer, gave an evil chuckle and said, "I'll be in your life forever." That may well be true, though I believe we will get some systems in place that will eventually mean quick spiff-ups and not endless hours of work. When it comes to papers, I think I may need to have items scanned and reduce the volume of original paper ephemera, though the tactile and visual experience of handling items sometimes brings more emotion than the information on it. That response is one of the reasons that I'll always love telling stories with paper scrapbooking, though I'm an ardent fan of the digital process. Scrapbooking started the path to how I met Elena Lai Echeverry, a former guest on this podcast. I was down to Southern California to visit her recently, where she was working on the home and hobby area of the San Diego County Fair. I found a way to contribute that did not overtax my neck, and so was able to participate in a few activities with other volunteers from CharityWings.org for the fair. It looks like the fair will be a lot of fun, with around 150 make-and-take crafting events, oodles of creativity to jump into, and lots to admire. I have the California State Fair in my backyard, but the county fairs are sometimes even more enjoyable. I know some, like San Diego's, are quite large with lots of crowds, and that can be overwhelming for many folks. Approaching the day with a plan will make the experience less intimidating. I hope you take advantage of a county event near you. I love seeing the participation of the local population in the events. It's a delightful way for us to share that sense of community and appreciate the many talents of our neighbors. Speaking of creative contributions, join me now in conversation with Alison Brown as we discuss her talents and how she brings the wonders of our environment to share with us in her creative approach. So welcome, Alison.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great. And as I said, you're a photographer and you do some sustainability work. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about what it is that you actually do.
Sure. So I've been a photographer for about 10 years, since 2008. And I also did study environmental studies in my undergrad, starting in 2004 at UC Santa Barbara. But in 2008, I had a really good friend who actually was a war photographer, and he also had done work for National Geographic. And he really inspired me to get into photography. So I actually asked for a professional DSLR for my graduation gift from college. And after that, I went with my friend to Southeast Asia for 6 months, and we went on a backpacking trip. And I really just used my camera and did a lot of travel photography and met other travel photographers, and they taught me a few tricks. But yeah, I took a ton of photos. I think they say that you have to take 10,000 photos before you're even decent at photography. So I think I definitely got in my 10,000 during that trip. But yeah, it was awesome. And, since then I've gone on a number of trips. I lived over in Australia for about 4 years, and I worked in sustainability over there for local governments, primarily on big, large scale energy efficiency projects, and was also doing photography over there and got my work featured by Tourism Australia, and I get my work featured by quite a few different travel Instagram accounts, which is always good publicity.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been a journey. I love photography. It's something that I find to be really inspiring, and I think every photographer is very different, and I love even looking at other photographers' work and seeing kind of their view on the world. So. Oh
yeah. And you said you did this in travel, and your landscape photography is really beautiful and inspired. I mean, do you, obviously, though, I think, I was looking at something today, I think on Facebook, where someone was, there's a fellow who teaches classes and was talking about landscape photography. And he had a few tips about that and said, you really can do things even, in your local environment, and they can look wonderful if you get inspired by them. But of course, beautiful places make it easier.
Totally.
So,
yeah.
And then the 6 months you spent in Southeast Asia, had that been something you'd always wanted to do, was to go to that part of the world?
Yeah, I mean, right after college, my budget was very limited. I think we had saved up each $6,000, and we had that amount to last us for 6 months.
Ooh, yeah.
So, yeah, we lived quite frugally, but, Southeast Asia was also a place we could go and live on $6,000 for 6 months. So it was, kind of a no-brainer. But actually, the real reason why we chose that place was because me and a couple of my college friends were in Santa Barbara, and we went to check out a local hostel in downtown Santa Barbara. And we walked in, and there was an entire wall with a huge map of the world. And we had talked about going traveling after college. So each of us closed our eyes, and then we walked up to the wall and put our hand on the wall. And wherever our hand landed was where we were going to go. So I think my friend picked India, I picked Southeast Asia, and another one picked South America or something. But they didn't wind up going on the trip, so I decided to stick with Southeast Asia and go with another friend. So,
well, that's great. It's too bad they didn't go on their adventures.
I know. They've since been, but not on that trip. So.
Well, that sounds like an interesting way to pick a place. But, I think when I went to Southeast Asia, I had a meeting in Korea, and I wanted to see more of that part of the world. And traveling on my own, I was somewhat limited, and I was also, the meeting couldn't change its date. So I had to find some place that I could go that worked into the schedule and was, somewhat supervised. I thought of going somewhere on my own, and the travel agent said, "You're traveling alone. I won't allow that."
Fair.
Fair enough. So that's how I ended up going to Myanmar, which I found to be a totally fascinating country. So what year were you there?
So Myanmar was a separate trip that I did in, I think it was 2013. So actually, yeah, Myanmar was the first country I went to do actually by myself as like a completely solo trip. I was there for 10 days and met another English girl who was actually a journalist for the BBC. And she and I traveled together. You couldn't say that you were a journalist, but she was there for personal reasons anyway, but was a little bit worried being there and being caught out for being a journalist. But we became friends and we did some awesome tours together. We did a sunrise boat tour of Inle Lake together. And then I met another girl from Spain. She and I went to the temples of Bagan, did a couple tours there. I think it was only, the borders had only been open, I think, officially for about a year when I went. So
yeah, it must have been, because I think they've been open a couple of years when I was, or 2 years or something when I went there. So you were right there, right at the beginning of them opening up. But it's and because of that, of course, that's why to me, that's one of the more fascinating countries, just because it was so isolated for so long. But all of Southeast Asia is very interesting. The only other place I've been in Southeast Asia itself was to Thailand briefly, but it's all very lovely, and it's certainly a place I would want to go back to. And your photos are fantastic. And Australia, that, of course, you had work there, but it's also a very big country and continent and amazing landscapes. Beautiful to take photos of. So how do you do much sustainability work now that you're back in America?
Yeah, I have been a little bit. Some of my clients have been doing sustainability consulting and a lot of more around like communications for companies focusing on sustainability. But my clients are still mostly in Australia, the work that I have been doing. I have been looking to get back into it now that I'm back in the United States. I mean, there's definitely no shortage of work to be done, especially what's going on in the political sphere. So, but yeah, I think more recently I have been focusing more on my photography, and I did like an Earth Day special this month where I was donating, or I have been donating 20% of my profits from my print sales to the Natural Resources Defense Council. So I'm really trying to tie my photography in with sustainability because, you know, my work is so focused around landscapes and nature. I feel like, you know, if people are able to emotionally connect with my photo, I hope that, you know, they want to preserve that beautiful landscape for, you know, their children and, you know, future generations. And, you know, my aim is to inspire them to change their lifestyle a little bit through also like my writing and through my communications work to just kind of make people aware of, you know, how their actions are directly impacting the environment, especially with waste and plastic. There's so much plastic pollution these days. And actually, after I finished it, so I was living in Australia and I was working over there, and I also did a master's over there in sustainability management and journalism at Monash University. And after I finished my master's, I applied for a volunteer program with the Ocean Cleanup Organization. Oh. And we actually sailed from Hawaii to California to do research on the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And I think the data was just released, or the report was just released, that I think they discovered that it's 8 times the size of California or something. And so, yeah, it's huge.
One of my...
like unfathomable.
I know, it is an amazing problem. Well, one of my recent guests, Patricia Newman, wrote a book for children called Plastic Ahoy, concerned about the plastics in the ocean and things that children can do. So there's a key tie in there. But yes, well, that was one of the things that interested me in having you be on the show, is that you have beautiful landscape photography and a deep concern about our beautiful environment. So that was something I noticed right off in exploring your blog and the webpage that I had. So maybe one of the things before we go any further in the interview is let our listener know exactly where it is that they can find you so they can check this all out. Yeah,
so you can find me at AlisonBrownPhotography.com, and that is ALISONBROWN photography.com. And if you would like to send me an email, you can reach me at Alison@AlisonBrownPhotography.com.
Well, that's good for people to know. And I guess, you said how you really got into the photography bit. I mean, that was through school, but did you kind of mentioned you had an interest before. I mean, did this start early in your life? Were there other photographers around? What kind of influences do you think you had that got you going in this direction?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think I'm definitely someone who's always just taken a lot of pictures. Even in high school, before having a digital camera, I always had disposable cameras. And even now, I just picked them up from my mom's recently. I've got a whole garbage bag full of photos that I took in high school. Yeah, I don't know. I always loved taking photos. I loved, even back then, taking the photo and then getting them printed and having a look at them and seeing how some turned out. But yeah, in high school, actually, my creative outlet was makeup. So I wanted to be a makeup artist for a really long time. And I would actually do all of my friends' makeup for like prom and even for weddings, and even still to this day, I still sometimes do people's makeup for special events.
So always an artistic bent.
Yeah, so there's always been this artist in me, but it's funny because until you actually asked me to do this podcast, I've never actually inherently viewed myself as an artist or someone who is particularly artistic, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just because I have also been so focused on like sustainability and the environment, especially in more of my professional life, or that's very focused on facts and focused very much on kind of like hard evidence and stuff like that, I think that side of my brain sometimes goes maybe a little bit into overdrive and, I forget about the fact that I am also a creative person and,
Well, I think we're all creative, but you found an outlet that really helps you express that. And so you were did you feel like you were influenced more into the science direction when you were growing up? You said you didn't really feel that, even though you had this interest in makeup and you took a lot of pictures. Was that more where you were headed?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so growing up, I grew up in the Bay Area. I grew up in San Jose and Mountain View, and I went to a really, really competitive high school in the Bay Area, and it was very, very academically focused, very academically driven. So I think just growing up, I grew up in that environment, and that was what I was focused on. So I wasn't really that focused on my creative side. It was more about getting good grades, getting into a good college, and that was kind of the focus of my younger years, I guess. Not so much that I felt super pressured and, had no time to like hang out with friends, but it was definitely quite a demanding high school experience. So I think in that sense, perhaps it was just a little bit, I was not able to focus on my creative side as much, or it wasn't as fostered as maybe someone who had a different high school experience. But I think also just growing up in the Bay Area, we had, the first laptop program and things of that nature. It was very like technology focused and very kind of forward thinking in that way. So, I grew up in quite a progressive family. My grandparents were very environmentally minded. So they actually had the first Prius, and they were the first people I knew or had heard of that were going to put solar panels on their house. So I think through them, they were very concerned about the environment. Yeah, very influential. And I was quite close to them. I actually lived with them for a couple years in my life. And yeah, I think that they were definitely very influential because I saw that they really cared about the future of my generation and the future of, my kids, like the future of my kids that they haven't even met yet. So, it just felt like they were doing the most responsible thing at a time where people were still very skeptical about climate change, and it was still quite new at that time. But they're like, well, if there's something we can do to help, we're going to do it. So, yeah.
That is very inspiring. I think, we wonder sometimes about how we influence our children and our grandchildren. And obviously, just by the very simple things we do, probably just practicing some of the simple tips for being better water managers and more ecologically sound. I saw that you had a little blog post on that on your website.
Mm-hmm.
Tips for people of things that they could do and I think just little habits like that can be both beneficial, but also impart our concerns to family.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really cool that you found a way to combine your passions for art and your concerns for the environment. I think that's very helpful. Are there any projects that you're working on combining those two right now?
Right now, not specifically. I mean, I try to do different projects in relation to photos that I've wanted to take for a long time. So I've wanted to try to find some really great photos of the wildflowers in California. So I'm still on the hunt for some really great wildflowers. So if anyone knows of any great wildflowers in the Bay Area, please send me a message. Yeah.
But there
are things like that I've been trying to find. Yeah, but we'll see.
Well, wildflowers, I think that just an interesting aside, because my daughter-in-law's grandparents were very involved in Death Valley. Her grandfather was a well-known geologist in the area, mm-hmm. but one thing that's really interesting that you might find interesting is that her grandmother has a coloring book of the wildflowers of Death Valley that's still, I think, available in the gift stores in the park. So, but just an interesting aside that I thought of when you mentioned wildflowers in California. So
yeah, a lot of them are down south.
Yeah, you may have to, but I'm sure there's many here in Northern mm-hmm. California, but it was just an interesting side story that came to my mind when you mentioned that. But
yeah.
You had, let's see, because the reason I first started looking at your photography was something that came from the Women's Environmental Network. Had you done a publication for them or had some sort of sales for?
Yeah, so that was for my Earth Day promotion. Yeah. Uh-huh. So they promoted it basically. Yeah. So if you buy a print through my website for the month of April, I'm going to be donating 20% of the profits to the Natural Resources Defense Council.
That was how that link worked, because you had mentioned you were doing that. Okay. I think I have that straight now. Very good. I think that's a wonderful endeavor. And like I said, that was one of the things that attracted my attention. And then I was looking at the photographs, and they're really outstanding pieces of work. So that definitely was very inspirational. And speaking of inspiration, I was wondering if you had any sort of general thoughts about creativity for our listener.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like you said, I think everyone is creative, but I think, some people have really spent the time to tap into it. I mean, I think some people, are very gifted in certain ways, whether it's, some people are really gifted in painting, and everything they paint is amazing. Some people are, gifted in photography. Others are gifted in writing, or maybe you are creative in all of those ways. But I think, I've found that I've done my best work also if I'm going through kind of a time of healing, and I'm using my creative outlet as a kind of outlet for some emotional healing, or also just a way to kind of channel my emotions and get them, out into the world so they're not, inside. So yeah, I found that, if you are going through any kind of emotional trauma or emotional situation, I find that, art or focusing on your art can be a really awesome way to kind of help yourself heal. But yeah, I mean, I think the more time and the more energy you put towards something, I think anyone can be really good at whatever they choose. You may not be the best artist ever, but, I think everyone has something valuable to contribute to the world. And creatively. So, yeah, I think that's what makes the world a beautiful place to live in.
I think those are all sentiments that I've heard bits and pieces of before from other guests. So those all ring really true to me, and I can see how that is an integral part of your life. And those are good things. I think people really need to, when they're particularly overcome with situations or emotions, to sometimes get that out into some type of art will help them really cope very well with the things that they're dealing with. And you're right, you don't have to create a masterpiece in order to express that emotion. And yet it can be just a really valuable way of touching base with your feelings and the world. Mm-hmm. And so are there any other things that you wanted to go over today and speak about? This is your opportunity.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that, my goal through, just by being a photographer and, taking photos of beautiful landscapes and everything, that I like to think that, people, this is my vision. This is how I see the world. And, I challenge other people to also take photos. And if they have any interest in photography, just keep taking photos and you'll get better. You'll learn different techniques over time, but just keep practicing, and you don't need to spend $5,000 on a camera. There's so many cameras out there on the market that are a lot more affordable.
Well, even your phone takes pretty darn good pictures these days.
Yeah. I love my iPhone camera. But I think, a lot of people are, I think, entering into the realm of photography because of the advances in technology with cell phones. But I also, in addition to my work as a photographer, I also, invite people to really think about how their actions directly impact the environment, and if there are ways where they can cut back and save energy or save water, or really cut down on waste. If they can buy bulk at the grocery store instead of buying, a bunch of individual plastically wrapped items. I feel like in the Bay Area, we're very lucky in that we can do more of that. But if you live in, other parts of the United States or other parts of the world where that's not as easy, just try cutting out single-use plastic bags. Or if you have been purchasing plastic water bottles, stop doing that and start using a recycled one or a reusable one. So I feel like even just small little changes like that really make a huge difference in the end. If there's ways for you to drive less, that's also helpful. And even plastic straws. I know there's a bunch of campaigns right now about banning the use of plastic straws because those also wind up in our oceans. So, I think it's really easy to live in a society where we're constantly just consuming a lot, and we kind of lose track of how our individual actions actually have a huge effect in the grand scheme of things. So,
yeah, and there are so many of us, even just little bits of things that you do can have a major impact, really.
Yeah. And even, if you have kids, get the kids involved. I think one of the things that I really liked about living in Australia was that they have, Australia is also a very drought prone place. And I found that, when they had a huge drought, 15, 20 years ago, they almost ran out of water in the state of Victoria, where I was living in Melbourne, and they had built this whole desalination plant. But while they were going through this water crisis and it was looking like they were going to run out of water, they ran a huge government campaign that actually taught everyone how to save water. So every Australian I knew only used one sink of water to wash their dishes, even though they weren't in a drought anymore. That's just what they did. That's how they were taught. That's how they grew up. So even to this day, everyone just uses one sink of water to wash their dishes, and they're not running the tap the whole time. And one of my roommates actually kept a bucket in the shower, which I thought was really annoying and really weird. I'm like, why is there this bucket in the shower? But she actually used the shower runoff to catch water, and then we used that water to water all of the plants in our house. So there's little techniques like that I think can really save so much water in the end. Just washing, your dishes with one sink of water. It's really not that hard. But yet in the United States, I didn't grow up doing that. So it was interesting. I definitely learned a lot of things over there.
Yes, I think there are a lot of things that we can learn and lots of places we can go online to get that information. I think, as I said, I referred people to your blog because you do have blog posts that have helpful hints and talk about sustainability issues.
Mm-hmm.
And I would direct people to go there, and we probably should give that address again because it's a good spot.
Yeah, it's AlisonBrownPhotography.com. So AlisonBrown.com. And then if you want to access my blog, you can just go to AlisonBrownPhotography.com/blog. And I've got some travel articles, and I've also got some articles related to sustainability. So,
yeah, well, all things that are definitely passions of mine. And I've really enjoyed having this conversation and getting to know you a little bit better.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much for being on the show today. Thank you for listening. Show notes from today's episode of A Creative Approach podcast, where you can learn more about Alison, are available on the webpage www.acreativeapproachpodcast.com. Please join our Creative Approach Facebook page and the A Creative Approach Facebook group page too. There we welcome your questions and feedback on the show. Just a reminder to become a subscriber to A Creative Approach podcast on your favorite podcast platform if you've not already done so. The podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, the Google Play Store, Stitcher, and others. Please join A Creative Approach podcast in future conversations, where I hope you will find inspiration to make things, tell your story, and explore a creative approach to life.